Racist millionaire accuses a teenage girl of stealing his $100,000 watch. Right after being sentenced to the electric chair, something happened that left everyone speechless. Jonathan Michael was a man who exuded power and coldness in every gesture. A widower for over a decade and father to a deceased son, he built a business empire that included mansions, luxury cars, and an enviable collection of watches, his true obsession. Despite his wealth, Jonathan was a bitter and solitary figure, unable to see people as anything more than disposable pieces in his game of control. He treated his employees with disdain, seeing them as mere tools to maintain his impeccable lifestyle. Among them, Margaret suffered the most. Black, humble, and dedicated, she was frequently the target of racist insults that Jonathan delivered with the ease of someone who had never known the word consequence. Margaret had worked at the mansion for years, and despite the abusive treatment, she stayed on the job to support her teenage daughter, Samantha, who was 16. The days were long and heavy, but Margaret clung to the hope that one day life could be kinder to them. In this oppressive environment, she always tried to shield Samantha from the difficulties she faced. However, one day Margaret found herself in an unusual situation. Jonathan Michael was out of town, and the chance to bring Samantha to see where she worked became irresistible. With Jonathan absent, the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The staff spoke softly, but for the first time in a long time, their voices did not tremble. Margaret knew she was breaking a rule by bringing Samantha, but the young girl had never seen anything so grand. Upon entering the mansion, Samantha's eyes widened at the sight of the crystal chandeliers, walls adorned with artwork and sumptuous furniture. Everything seemed straight out of a fairy tale, a world completely different from the modest apartment where they lived. Fascinated, Samantha wandered the wide corridors and observed the staff in their immaculate uniforms. Every detail of the mansion was a reflection of Jonathan's fortune, but also of his need to control everything and everyone. Margaret, with a worried look, cautioned her daughter not to touch anything, knowing that any slip-up could be fatal for both of them. While Samantha admired the inner garden, Margaret continued her work, ensuring every corner of the house was spotless for the boss's return. Time flew by as Samantha explored the mansion's details with a mix of curiosity and enchantment, but the tranquility didn't last long. Jonathan Michael returned earlier than expected, and the sound of his firm footsteps echoed through the hallways, slicing through the air like a blade. Upon seeing Samantha, Jonathan did not hide his displeasure. His eyes narrowed, and his cold tone made everyone present in the room shrink back. "Who is this girl? What is she doing in my house without my permission?" he roared, his voice reverberating off the marble walls. Margaret, trying to control the tremor in her hands, explained that this was her daughter and that she had brought her to spend time together while she worked, but Jonathan didn't want to hear explanations. "This is unacceptable," he raged. He looked at Samantha with an expression of disgust, as if her presence defiled the purity of the place he so cherished. Without wasting time, he issued a severe reprimand to Margaret, making it clear that she would deeply regret bringing a stranger into his home. Margaret, ashamed and frightened, just lowered her head, knowing that any word she said would only increase Jonathan's ire. The day dragged on heavy and tense at the mansion. Jonathan continued to roam the house, scrutinizing the employees with a suspicious look, as if searching for something out of place. The sun was setting when Jonathan finally retreated to his office, seeking refuge in his watch collection. He sat at the desk and instinctively reached for one of his most expensive watches, a diamond-encrusted model valued at $100,000 that he always kept there. But it wasn't there. The empty spot on the shelf where the watch should have been was a direct insult to his sense of absolute control. Frustration quickly turned to suspicion. With clenched teeth and a steely gaze, he left the office and called for Margaret. "Where's my watch?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. Margaret, confused, stammered that she didn't know what he was talking about. Jonathan's face darkened. "Someone here stole my watch, and I will find out who it was," he said, his words cutting through the air like a sinister promise. Margaret's heart raced. She felt that something terrible was about to happen. The atmosphere at Jonathan Michael's mansion, already tense since his unexpected return, turned into a storm of tension and fear. Still furious over the discovery of his missing diamond watch, Jonathan wasted no time taking drastic measures. Phone in hand, he called the police, reporting the theft with the coldness of someone who feels no remorse. The news of the theft quickly spread through the corridors, and the mansion, which recently seemed like a fairy tale palace in Samantha's eyes, now felt like a labyrinth of uncertainty and dread. Margaret, her heart pounding, watched the police arrive in cars that quickly surrounded the property. They entered with authority, bringing an air of intimidation that made all the staff cower. Jonathan, with a barely disguised, triumphant smile, approached the chief of police, pointing to the missing watch as if it were evidence of personal betrayal. "It's a unique diamond watch. It's worth $100,000, he said, making clear the value of the item, but also the weight of his suspicion. The police began to search the mansion piece by piece, employee by employee. No one was immune to the thorough search. Everyone's belongings were turned inside out. Margaret, nervous, held Samantha's hand as they waited. She repeated to her daughter that everything would be fine, but the words felt hollow, unable to calm the growing fear. Then it was Samantha's turn. The police, following protocol, asked to inspect the young girl's backpack. Still trying to grasp the gravity of the situation, Samantha handed over her backpack with a calm look, knowing it only contained her school materials. The police opened the main compartment, and as expected, they found notebooks, books, and some pens. But when they opened a side compartment, their expressions changed. Jonathan's watch was there, gleaming intensely under the light like a trophy of a bitter victory. Samantha recoiled in shock, stammering that she didn't know how the watch ended up there. Tears began to roll down her face as she tried in vain to convince the police of her innocence. "I didn't steal it, I swear! I didn't know it was there!" Samantha's voice was a mix of desperation and disbelief, but no one seemed willing to listen. To them, the evidence was clear. Margaret, seeing the watch in her daughter's backpack, was paralyzed. The ground seemed to open beneath her feet. "Samantha, no." "This can't be true," she murmured, but her words faded into the air. The sight of her daughter being handcuffed broke something inside her, a pain so deep that even the scream that escaped her lips could not express it. Jonathan, watching the scene, crossed his arms, satisfied. For him, it was all too convenient. More than recovering his watch, he now had the perfect opportunity to get rid of Margaret, the maid he so despised. "I warned you that you would regret bringing that girl into my house," Jonathan said with icy calm, his voice cutting like a knife. Without giving Margaret a chance to defend herself, he fired her in front of everyone, emphasizing that he didn't want to see her or her thieving daughter in his mansion ever again. Margaret, speechless, just watched as Jonathan destroyed everything she had fought to build. As the police took Samantha to the station, Margaret tried to follow the car but was prevented. A sense of helplessness overcame her as she watched her daughter being taken to a fate she never could have imagined for Samantha. Unemployed and with her daughter accused of a serious crime, Margaret felt her world collapsing. Every step she took seemed to sink her deeper into the quicksand of injustice. She returned to the mansion gate, where the staff, still in shock, watched the scene with sorrow. No one dared to raise their voice against Jonathan, and the silence was a cruel reminder of his power over everyone there. Margaret, with tears in her eyes and a broken heart, murmured to herself, "This can't be the end. I will prove my daughter's innocence. I will do whatever it takes." But the words sounded fragile. Margaret knew she was fighting against a powerful adversary who used his wealth and influence to crush anyone in his path. Despair set in, a heavy shadow that threatened to smother any hope of justice. Margaret, alone and without resources, looked toward the horizon, trying to find a glimpse of light in the midst of the darkness. The police station was a cold, impersonal, and oppressive place, a perfect reflection of the nightmare Margaret and Samantha were living. Samantha, despite her age, was placed in an improvised cell, separated from the adults, but still surrounded by dirty walls and bars that seemed to close her in a fate with no way out. The young girl couldn't stop trembling, not only from the cold of the room, but from the overwhelming fear of what was to come. She felt small and defenseless, unable to understand how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. Margaret, outside, was in a state of shock. With every passing hour, the weight of reality seemed to sink even more on her shoulders. She couldn't get the image of her daughter being handcuffed like a dangerous criminal out of her mind. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. Every time she tried to speak with a police officer or official, she was met with indifference or disdain. To them, Samantha was already marked as guilty, and Margaret was just another desperate mother trying to change what seemed inevitable. Without financial resources, Margaret secured a public defender for Samantha. Raphael, a young, newly graduated lawyer, took on the case more out of idealism than experience. He still believed he could make a difference, that he could bring justice to those without a voice. Upon meeting Margaret and Samantha, Raphael saw in them a reflection of all the injustices that motivated him to pursue law. He promised to fight with all his might, but Margaret saw in his eyes the insecurity of someone who didn't yet know the weight of the system. While Raphael prepared the case, Jonathan Michael, from the comfort of his mansion, moved his pieces with precision. He knew exactly how to use his influence to tip the scales of justice in his favor. He called in his lawyers, experts at manipulating the system, and gave clear orders. Samantha should receive the maximum punishment without any chance of clemency. For Jonathan, the goal was not just to punish the young girl, but also to send a message to everyone. No one challenges Jonathan Michael without facing the consequences. In the days following Samantha's arrest, Raphael dedicated himself to reviewing the case with attention. He spent sleepless nights going over every detail of the testimonies, trying to find something that could turn the tide in Samantha's favor. But the scenario seemed bleak. The mansion staff's statements were vague, and the presence of the watch in Samantha's backpack seemed irrefutable proof. Jonathan had been meticulous in his steps, and the narrative was clearly shaped to incriminate the young girl. Margaret, on the other hand, spent her days trying to visit Samantha and offering as much comfort as she could through the bars. She held her daughter's hands, murmuring promises that everything would be okay, even when her own faith was fading. The conditions at the police station were harsh, and Samantha, who had never faced anything like this, seemed to wither away each day. The face that was once full of life now showed signs of exhaustion and fear. Raphael, in his investigations, began to notice inconsistencies in Jonathan's statement. Something didn't fit, a small discrepancy in the timeline that could be the key to changing the course of the trial. Jonathan claimed to have seen the watch shortly before it disappeared, and that Samantha was in the house at that exact moment. However, Raphael managed to verify with other employees that Jonathan had spent a considerable amount of time in the office before leaving and returning to the room where Samantha was. This interval could be crucial, but it was still insufficient to prove any direct manipulation. As Raphael tried to piece things together, Jonathan continued to increase the pressure. He used his connections to speed up the process, ensuring that Samantha would be judged quickly, preferably without much time for defense. Every move he made was an attempt to crush any hope Margaret had, making her feel the weight of her mistake in challenging his power. For Jonathan, this was not just about a watch. It was about control, about keeping his world in order and his rules intact. The feeling of helplessness that permeates Margaret as she watches her daughter being swallowed by a system that seems to have no room for justice or compassion. Raphael, despite being inexperienced, feels the weight of his responsibilities, but also the urgency to fight against an opponent who plays dirty and without scruples. He knows he needs more than just goodwill to balance the forces against Jonathan Michael. But for now, all he has are his convictions and the determination not to let another young girl be wronged. Margaret, for her part, feels lost. Each passing day is a cruel reminder that the system is on Jonathan's side. But deep in her pain, she finds a small spark of resistance. She cannot give up on Samantha, not now, not ever. Raphael promises Margaret that he will do everything possible and impossible to prove Samantha's innocence, even knowing that the road ahead is filled with almost insurmountable obstacles. Margaret and Raphael's fight against Jonathan Michael is just beginning, and the initial despair begins to turn into a fierce determination to fight against the growing injustices. The courtroom was packed, and the atmosphere was dense, almost suffocating. Everyone present seemed to feel the weight of the decision that was about to be made. Judge Vitor Gimenez, with his stern demeanor and imposing posture, presided over the trial with a rigidity that made it clear his intolerance for crime. Jonathan Michael, sitting beside his lawyers, maintained a calculated, cold expression, confident that everything would go as planned. Margaret watched her daughter Samantha, seated on the defendant's bench, and felt her heart tighten with every passing moment. The young girl was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to keep her composure. For Samantha, the trial was not just about her innocence, but about trying to understand how her life fell apart so quickly. Raphael, the young lawyer who had taken on her defense, stood by her side, trying to convey confidence, although he himself felt the overwhelming weight of the circumstances. Jonathan's lawyers were relentless in their closing arguments. They painted a picture of Samantha as an opportunistic delinquent, ready to take advantage of the slightest chance to steal. They reinforced the narrative of the watch's value, insinuating that Samantha had premeditated the theft, taking advantage of the trust Jonathan supposedly placed in his staff. With every word, Samantha's image as a victim faded, replaced by the image of a criminal who needed to be exemplarily punished. When it was Raphael's turn, he stood up and did his best to highlight the inconsistencies in the case, emphasizing that Jonathan Michael's version had gaps and that the image of Samantha as a thief made no sense to anyone who knew her. He pointed out the absurdity of someone so young and without a criminal record trying to commit theft in a place where she would immediately be a suspect. Raphael appealed to logic and reason, but each argument seemed to hit an impenetrable wall: the influence and power of Jonathan Michael. Judge Vitor listened to everything attentively, his face giving little away about what he was thinking. He was known for his harshness and tendency to impose the severest sentences whenever possible, and Samantha's case seemed to be heading for another such example. Margaret could barely breathe as the judge began to speak, her eyes fixed on the man who would soon decide her daughter's fate. "The court has carefully examined all the evidence and heard the arguments of the parties involved," began Judge Vitor, his voice echoing through the room, bringing an even more oppressive silence. "Given the evidence presented and considering the seriousness of the crime committed, this court cannot ignore the impact of this act on the order and safety of society." Margaret clenched her hands until her knuckles turned white, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. Raphael looked at Samantha, trying to convey some message of hope, but he knew his words and efforts were slipping away. Jonathan Michael, on the other hand, was in a state of near-contained euphoria. He had been waiting for this moment, and Samantha's fate seemed sealed. Judge Viter adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Samantha as he delivered the sentence no one wanted to hear. The defendant, Samantha, is sentenced to death by execution in the electric chair. The words were cold, cutting like a blade, and fell on Margaret like a mortal blow. She screamed, a sound of pure pain that echoed through the courtroom, while Raphael closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the crushing weight of the injustice. Shock spread through the room. Court officials looked at each other, some visibly uncomfortable with the severity of the sentence. Margaret's sobs mingled with the growing murmur of the audience. Jonathan Michael sat back, took a deep breath, and gave a slight smile of satisfaction. For him, this was a complete victory, a revenge that materialized before his eyes. However, before the judge could finalize the sentence, the courtroom doors burst open with force. A man entered hurriedly, with determined steps and a resolute gaze that immediately captured everyone's attention. The murmurs hushed, and all eyes turned to the figure crossing the courtroom. Jonathan Michael, upon seeing the man, froze, his face losing all color. It was Joshua, his son, whom everyone believed to have been dead for years. "I am Joshua Michael," said the man, his voice firm and resonant, breaking the absolute silence that had taken over the room, "and I am here to tell the truth about what really happened at my father's mansion." The revelation fell like lightning, shocking everyone present and creating a wave of murmurs and exclamations of surprise. Judge Vita looked at Joshua with a mix of surprise and skepticism, while Jonathan Michael just stared, unable to process what was happening. Joshua continued, explaining that he and his mother Olivia had fled to escape Jonathan's abuses, forging their deaths to ensure they were never found. He detailed the years of suffering under Jonathan's control and how they decided to disappear to protect themselves. Joshua explained that Raphael, during his investigation, had managed to find him and convince him to return to expose Jonathan's lies, especially upon discovering that Samantha was about to be unjustly condemned. Joshua's words were a devastating blow to Jonathan Michael, who until then had controlled the trial with a firm grip. The revelation that his son was alive and, even more so, willing to expose his crimes, drastically altered the atmosphere of the courtroom. Judge Viter, after hearing Joshua, decided that the court would need a recess to assess the new situation. The judge eventually ordered a break as Margaret rushed to embrace Samantha, crying with relief and disbelief. Joshua, now beside Raphael, offered his support and a promise that the truth would be revealed. Jonathan Michael, sitting, looked around with a mix of fury and despair, realizing that the control he believed he had was slipping from his hands. Joshua's presence in the courtroom not only reversed the expectations of the case, but paved the way for the revelation of even deeper truths that promised to dismantle the carefully constructed facade of Jonathan Michael. Joshua's return had shaken the foundations of the case, and now all eyes were on what would come next. Judge Vito Gimenez, who had already demonstrated his toughness, seemed even more focused as he watched the events unfold. He knew Joshua's testimony could change everything, and the weight of that possibility hung over the room like a heavy cloud. Joshua took the witness stand, his imposing and resolute presence contrasting with the somber atmosphere of the courtroom. He began his testimony, describing the abuses he and his mother Olivia suffered at the hands of Jonathan Michael. He spoke about the oppressive control, the fits of rage, and the constant fear that accompanied them. Every word from Joshua was like a sharp blade, revealing Jonathan's true nature to everyone. He explained that to free themselves, he and Olivia had faked their deaths and fled to a distant country, living under new identities to escape Jonathan's shadow. As Joshua told his story, the murmurs among the audience grew. The shock and outrage were palpable, and even Jonathan's lawyers seemed destabilized by the unexpected turn of events. Jonathan Michael, who had maintained a facade of control until now, was visibly disturbed, his face contorted in an expression of anger and disbelief. He never expected Joshua to reappear, much less to destroy him publicly. After Joshua's testimony, Raphael stood up, holding in his hands the final piece that could seal Jonathan's fate. He approached the judge with renewed determination. "Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence that corroborates Mr. Joshua Michael's testimony and unequivocally demonstrates Samantha's innocence." Raphael displayed a flash drive containing security footage obtained with the help of the mansion employees who had been victims of the same abuse of power that Joshua described. With Judge Vita's permission, the footage began to play in the courtroom. The recordings were clear and detailed, showing Jonathan Michael in the office, examining the diamond watch with a calculating look. Then he walked to the hallway where the employees' backpacks were lined up. Jonathan picked up a backpack identical to Samantha's and placed the watch inside, meticulously adjusting it to make it appear natural. The footage continued, showing Jonathan returning to the main room and shortly after calling the staff to announce the watch's disappearance. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as everyone watched the footage. The revelation was a direct blow to the narrative Jonathan had constructed. The whispers of astonishment soon turned into murmurs of indignation. Margaret, her eyes fixed on the screen, felt a mix of relief and anger growing inside her. Samantha, upon seeing the footage, finally let the tears she had been holding back flow, her emotions finally overflowing. Jonathan Michael, confronted with irrefutable proof of his own setup, could not hide his expression of shock and fear. For the first time, he was at a loss for words. His mask of control and coldness crumbled before everyone, revealing the desperate and vindictive man he had always been. Jonathan's lawyers, who had defended the case confidently until that moment, were now in an untenable position, unable to refute the overwhelming evidence presented by Raphael. Judge Vitor, who had maintained a reserved demeanor, seemed deeply impressed. He paused for a long moment before speaking, weighing the impact of the new evidence. The room awaited intense silence as the judge began to speak again. "In light of the new evidence presented and the testimony of Mr. Joshua Michael, this court finds that the charges against Samantha were deliberately fabricated by Mr. Jonathan Michael." The judge's voice was firm, carrying the authority that the situation demanded. The judge continued, now directing his gaze to Jonathan Michael, who seemed diminished in his chair. "Mr. Jonathan Michael, the court orders your immediate arrest on charges of perjury, falsification of evidence, and abuse of power. Your crimes against the young Samantha and your own son are unacceptable and will be judged with the full rigor of the law." The police, who were on standby, approached Jonathan, handcuffing him without ceremony. Jonathan, who had always believed he was above everyone, was now being taken away like a common criminal, exposed and disgraced before all. The accusation against Samantha was officially revoked, and the judge declared her innocent of all charges. Margaret's tears flowed freely as she hugged Samantha, feeling a relief that seemed impossible minutes earlier. Raphael, though still new to the profession, had proven his worth by bringing the truth to light and saving Samantha from an unjust fate. Margaret, still sobbing with emotion, thanked Raphael and Joshua, who had proven to be true heroes amid the chaos. Joshua, watching Jonathan being led away, felt a complex mix of emotions. There was revenge, yes, but also a deep sorrow for the father he never truly knew. However, he knew that justice had been done, and that the truth had finally prevailed over Jonathan Michael's lies and manipulations. Jonathan, now being escorted out of the courtroom, a defeated man without the power he so prized, For Margaret, Samantha, and Joshua, the road ahead was one of rebuilding and renewal, with the certainty that even in the face of the greatest adversities, truth and justice can triumph. The beginning of Jonathan Michael's downfall marked not just the end of a tyrant, but also the rebirth of lives he had tried to destroy. Jonathan Michael's imprisonment ushered in a new era for everyone involved. With the former patriarch incarcerated, the mansion that had once been a symbol of oppression and control now had a new owner, Joshua. Upon inheriting the property, Joshua felt the burden of transforming that dark place into a home that reflected values of welcome, respect, and renewal. He knew this change was not just for him, but for everyone who had been affected by his father's actions. One of Joshua's first actions was to invite Margaret to return to the mansion, this time not as a mere housekeeper, but as the manager of the house, someone he fully trusted to help transform the environment. He knew that Margaret possessed a quiet strength and wisdom that would make the mansion a truly welcoming place. When he made the offer, Margaret, still emotional from recent events, hesitated for a moment, but the sincere look in Joshua's eyes and the promise of a new beginning led her to accept. Margaret, always resilient, saw Joshua's offer as an opportunity to rebuild her life. She remembered how the mansion had been a place of pain and humiliation, but now, under Joshua's new leadership, she saw the chance to rewrite those memories. Upon returning, she found a transformed environment. Joshua had removed all the symbols that recalled Jonathan Michael's era, replacing them with items that reflected an atmosphere of peace and hope. The walls, once laden with cold, impersonal artwork, now displayed photographs of landscapes and works by local artists that radiated warmth and life. Olivia, Joshua's mother, also returned, now free from Jonathan's ghost. She and Joshua worked side by side to turn the mansion into a home that celebrated life and overcoming adversity. For Olivia, it was a return full of meaning. She had fled that place to save herself and her son, but now, back, she felt she could finally close the circle and build something positive from the ruins of the past. Olivia brought with her a sense of lightness and wisdom, supporting Joshua every step of the way on this new journey. With Margaret at the helm of the house's management, the changes continued. She organized the staff, giving voice and autonomy to everyone, something unthinkable in Jonathan Michael's time. The environment, once a reflection of Jonathan's tyranny, transformed into a place where employees were respected and their opinions valued. Margaret made it a point to remind everyone that they were now a family, a group united by resilience and the will to move forward. Samantha, inspired by the entire experience she had lived through, made an important decision for her future. During the darkest days of her life, she saw how devastating it could be to be at the mercy of a system that seemed to see people as mere appearances and circumstances. Raphael, her lawyer, had been a beacon of hope, and his impact on her life made her realize the importance of fighting for justice. With the support of her mother and Joshua, Samantha decided to study law, with the dream of becoming a lawyer who could help other people who, like her, needed a voice. Samantha's decision brought a new spark to her eyes. She dedicated herself to her studies with a determination that surprised everyone. Joshua and Olivia supported her journey, helping with everything she needed to achieve her goal. Margaret, proud, followed every one of her daughter's achievements, feeling that despite everything, life had given them a second chance. The mansion that had once been a symbol of authoritarianism was now becoming a hub of community and support. Joshua began organizing charitable events and opened the doors of the house to local projects, turning it into a meeting point for initiatives that promoted social justice and collective well-being. He also established a foundation in his mother Olivia's name, aimed at supporting women and children fleeing situations of violence and abuse, offering resources and support to help them rebuild their lives. Olivia, with her experience and empathy, became directly involved in the Foundation's projects, offering mentoring and emotional support to those in need. Her presence in the mansion symbolized the triumph of courage over fear, and her daily work alongside Joshua and Margaret made the mansion a place of healing and hope. As time passed, Jonathan Michael's mansion became the opposite of everything he had represented. The place that had once been a monument to control and fear was now blossoming as a symbol of resilience and renewal. The once silent corridors now echoed with laughter, conversations, and the sound of new opportunities being created every day. The mansion became a refuge, a place where new stories could be written and where the past was not forgotten but rather overcome. For Margaret, Samantha, Joshua, and Olivia, the mansion was more than a house. It was a testament to the fact that, with courage and determination, even the deepest wounds could be healed. Every corner of the mansion now reflected not just Joshua's taste, but the collective spirit of all those who helped transform that space. Samantha, now beginning her journey in law school, determined to make a difference, while Margaret watched with pride and gratitude at the place that had become a true home for all. Joshua, alongside Olivia, looked at the mansion and felt that they had finally managed to transform the past into a solid foundation for a bright and promising future. Jonathan Michael's mansion, now full of life and purpose, stood as a testament to the power of renewal and the strength to rebuild. With Jonathan Michael imprisoned and awaiting trial, life for Margaret, Samantha, Joshua, and Olivia began to take a new course. The days that followed were marked by adaptation and renewal, driven by a collective pursuit of justice and the desire to rebuild their lives away from the dark shadow left by Jonathan. Jonathan Michael's trial became a major public interest event. The image of the powerful and untouchable businessman had been undone, and now he stood before the law, facing the consequences of his actions. During the trial, new witnesses came forward, including former mansion employees and business associates, who shared accounts of how Jonathan manipulated, abused, and exploited everyone around him. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his attempt to maintain any semblance of dignity was quickly undone by the weight of testimonies and evidence. The judge, recognizing the severity of the crimes, did not hesitate to sentence Jonathan Michael to life imprisonment. Jonathan received the sentence with a mix of fury and despair, his pride shattered before the public. He had lost everything: his freedom, his empire, and most painfully, the respect and love of his own son. As he was taken away to serve his sentence, Jonathan became an example that the abuse of power and lack of humanity carried a high price. While Jonathan faced his new reality, Margaret and Samantha moved forward, rebuilding their lives with the help of Joshua and Olivia. Margaret, now the mansion's manager, thrived in her new role. She not only organized the house, but also got involved in the community projects Joshua had initiated. The mansion had become a support hub for many in the community, offering educational programs, cultural events, and initiatives to support women and children in vulnerable situations. Samantha, inspired by her own experience and Raphael's determination, threw herself into her law studies. The young woman stood out at university from day one, motivated by her passion to make a difference and help those without a voice. She got involved in human rights and social advocacy projects, using her own story as a beacon of hope for other students and peers. Throughout her years at university, Samantha also remained close to Raphael, who became a mentor and friend. He closely followed Samantha's progress, offering advice and encouragement whenever she faced challenges. Raphael's impact on her life was profound, and Samantha knew that without him, her path could have been completely different. They maintained a strong bond, a friendship that transcended the role of lawyer and client, evolving into a partnership based on respect and a shared goal of seeking justice. The relationship between Joshua and Margaret also evolved over time. Mutual respect and gratitude blossomed into a sincere friendship. They shared the responsibility of transforming the mansion, and this partnership led to deep reflections on the past, healing, and new possibilities. Margaret and Joshua often discussed the challenges they had faced and how they could use their experiences to continue helping others. As the years passed, Margaret and Joshua developed a special connection. Their mutual support and shared battles against Jonathan Michael's legacy strengthened their bonds. Joshua, who had been deprived of a true family for so long, found in Margaret and Samantha a sense of belonging that he thought he had lost forever. While the relationship between Joshua and Margaret remained in a realm of deep friendship and respect, there was a tacit understanding that this special connection transcended the events that brought them together. As Samantha continued her academic journey, Margaret found new ways to contribute to the community. She started a mentoring program for young women, especially those who, like her, faced social and financial challenges. Her inspiring talks on resilience and overcoming adversity attracted many people, and Margaret began to be seen as a figure of strength and hope in the community. On the day of her graduation, Samantha walked up to the stage to receive her diploma, applauded by everyone who had supported her along the way. Margaret, sitting in the front row, couldn't hold back the tears of pride. Samantha was not just her daughter, but a living example of courage and determination. Joshua and Olivia, beside Margaret, applauded enthusiastically, aware that this moment represented more than just an academic achievement. It was the triumph of justice and truth over adversity. After graduation, Samantha began working for a non-governmental organization dedicated to human rights and the defense of wronged individuals. Her work focused especially on cases of abuse of power and social injustices, using what she had learned both in theory and from her personal experience to fight for real change. Samantha didn't see her career just as a profession, but as a calling, a life mission to ensure that others never went through what she and her mother endured. Jonathan Michael's mansion, now transformed into a symbol of resilience and renewal, continued to serve as a beacon for the community. With Joshua, Margaret, and Olivia at the helm, the place became a sanctuary of hope and an active center of social change. They made room for new projects, including educational programs and psychological support for those who, like them, needed a second chance. Joshua, reflecting on everything they had achieved, felt a deep gratitude for finding a new family in Margaret and Samantha. He knew that together they had managed to transform not just a physical space, but also their lives and those of many others. Their journey had been marked by challenges and losses, but also by victories and the rebirth of something beautiful and meaningful. Looking to the future, Joshua, Margaret, Samantha, and Olivia knew there was still much to be done. But unlike the past, they now faced each day with hope and determination. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of tyranny now rose as a living testament to the power of truth, justice, and the human ability to rebuild even in the face of the greatest adversities. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you